Hello and welcome to day number 3, the third one of these where I talk about my third favourite album of this year, and I don't know what else to say to pad this out. I'm trying to, I should have scripted something out, and my first instinct is to go to something I remember seeing online where you saw a bit of David Tennant recording bits of Blink from Doctor Who, and where he starts talking about his first ever gig and he starts talking about the House Martins because that bit that's being filmed is going to be muted. And I'm thinking about doing that, and he says some words like bingle bongle, dingle dangle, jingle jangle, whatever stuff like that. And he comes across quite well, but I'm running out of time.
Number 3.
Broken Equipment by Bodega. Benjamin Hosey from the band Bodega has a very interesting relationship with social media and the internet. Something that he delved quite into with the first album from Bodega, End the Scroll, that was released in 2019, yeah. The term End the Scroll obviously being a kind of play on the idea that you're just endlessly scrolling through feeds of everything. It's something that he clearly still feels is something affecting modern society as well as the growing world around him. With Bodega's second album, Broken Equipment, he again takes aim at that, but also kind of expands into perhaps a more kind of social critique to almost celebration of relationships in an album that feels not as focused, but an opportunity for a wider spectrum of topics for the band to talk about. Bodega are the band that are currently hitting the Brooklyn quota for bands that I like for this year at the moment. Yeah, they're a kind of indie pop, I think 5-piece thing at the moment, and they are. And when I first heard songs from the first album, I fell for them instantly. I thought they were brilliant. I loved them. And this album, I think, is even better.
Hello, Matt, and hello to all of the listeners of Pick a Disc. My name is Mark Adams, and I am a podcaster on the We Made This Podcast network. You may have heard me alongside Matt on Shipwrecked and Comatose, the podcast about Red Dwarf, or you may have heard me on ChuckyVision alongside Dev Elson when we chat about Chucky and the teleseries and all of the weird horror doll kind of things. Thanks for inviting me on, and I am going to completely ignore the brief, which I'm sure you're not completely surprised about. My album of the year is Driven to Madness by Dance with the Dead. As I've got a little bit older, I think I've embraced my metal love, and over the last couple of years it's become a lot more synthy in taste, and kind of like an amalgam of the stuff I enjoyed in the 80s compared to stuff I enjoyed in the 90s, and then my music taste retired in 2003. And Driven to Madness, I would describe it as perhaps the soundtrack of a 80s action film that I never knew I wanted. And I believe the genre is called synthwave or dark synth, but it's basically gothy goodness with lots of 80s inspired synthy stuff. And I was fortunate enough to go and see them live earlier this year. And I want to tell you about the biggest flex I think I've ever seen on a stage when it comes to a band. The album has no lyrics. In fact, all their albums have no lyrics. They don't have a lead singer. And so when it was their turn to come on, after some really good support actually, they turned up. They played 90 minutes of absolute banging synthwave goodness. They didn't talk on the microphone. In fact, there wasn't a microphone. And then, after they finished, they didn't do an encore. And if that isn't one of the biggest flexes I have ever seen on stage, I don't know what would be. And they were so damn good live. I was absolutely blown away. And here is where I ignore the brief. I would like to give an honourable mention to two similar albums, Turbo Rider by Reckless Love and Fascination by The Birthday Massacre. If you like gothy synthy stuff, all three of those albums are brilliant. Also in this year, my old favourite band from the 90s, The Crystal Method, released new material, which was great. They're a band that I feel have kind of taken their 90s trip-hop vibe and always kept relevance. That was called The Trip Out by the Crystal Method. And finally, it did feel a bit like I was listening to stuff from the 90s with two new releases by bands I was listening to in the late 90s. Two very industrial kind of feels. Divisive by Disturbed was uncannily like something they would have released 20 plus years ago. And Chasing Ghosts by the Stabbing Westwards, grossly underrated industrial band. Their new album is actually very, very good, but again, could have been released in the 90s. And finally, Rammstein have just released an album which I haven't listened to, but I'm very excited to, and that's called Zeit. Thanks, Matt. Sorry for ignoring the brief. Well, no, I'm not. But yeah, season's greetings and best wishes to everyone for a happy and prosperous new year.
This album ticks a couple of boxes. You've got the dual vocalists where you've got Ben Hosey and Nicky Belfiglio, who like swap and trade vocal duties. So naturally, that ticks a box for me. Yeah, multiple vocalists, yay. They also kind of soundtrack the New York City as well, and they do it in a way that feels like it's part of the band's identity. The relationship between kind of modern day technology and the hectic lifestyle that it seems to bring forward can be seen in certain songs like Doers. Doers is kind of made again about the young person, like the young professional in New York who like goes around and just lives for the doers who just seem to have their lives all mapped out and stuff. And again, something that Hosey seems to find interesting to comment on. Other songs that kind of highlight this as well. There's NYC Disambiguation. Has the very not very subtle, admittedly, chorus of New York was founded by a corporation, and from that chorus you can probably get the idea of what it's going on about. But it's the same kind of skeptical thing that he had in Ending the Scroll in terms of the internet and what it was doing, onto a much more wider target in New York City. The indie pop aspects of this work really well. Statuette on the Console is one of my favourite songs of this year. A song that I still don't fully understand what it's about, but blooming heck, I love that chorus and just the sound of it all kicking through. Another highlight for me on this is I think when the band begins to try to write a love song with Pillar on the Bridge of You, and yeah, it's pretty much likening romance to being a bridge with trucks driving all over you, which, no judgment here, but I quite like the kind of sentiment behind it anyway. And I quite like the kind of almost inverse of that kind of thing with All Past Lovers, where it's something that I think is kind of almost explored in Scott Pilgrim versus the World, in terms of that as you get older, you have to deal with not only your own history, but with the history of others and people that you meet. And it has a kind of almost mature, almost adult kind of introspection in the song that I really quite like. And yeah, and I quite like for that. There's a lot more I think I'll probably say about the album, because I feel like I'm not even delving into this as much as I really should do. But yeah, I genuinely love this. I think it's great.
Hello, this is Addis. Just wanted to say that my favourite album of the year has been Punk Rock Factory's A Whole New Wurst 2. It is the perfect mixture of Disney and punk rock. It's like the album was made for me, to be fair. If you're going to give it a listen, have a listen to Poor Unfortunate Souls from Little Mermaid, or Bruno from Encanto. They're just sheer brilliance, but actually the whole album from start to finish and its predecessor are incredible. And their next album is apparently based around musical theatre. It's like they're writing albums. Not even writing them, are they? It's like they're making albums just for me. Brilliant stuff.
I saw Bodega earlier this year at the Hare and Hounds, and every time I've seen them twice, and every time I've seen them, they seem to like throw like a set list that pretty much have every song off the first and second album. They seem to just be on stage forever, and I could just watch them for another hour. If I could see this band every day for ages, I would. I think they're a brilliant band live. I can't wait to see them again. And I recommend you go and see them. So yeah, I'm so looking forward to seeing what they come out with in the future. But for now, if you've not listened to Broken Equipment, I fully recommend listening to Broken Equipment.